Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 732. Today we're going to talk about Imperial Steam from Capstone Games and designer Alexander Humer. This is a 2 to 4 player economic style game. Now it's very mechanics driven, but to kind of spoil the lead a little bit, I'd say it's kind of in the ballpark of like a Brass or a Barrage, but plays absolutely nothing like those games. But it's a really kind of heavy 2 to 4 player economic strategy game. So let's go down to the table. I'll show you how it works and then also come back and tell you what I think. Okay, here you can see I set the game up for a 2-player game. You've got this large board here in the middle. This is kind of the countryside of Austria. Quite a good sized board. And then we've got here space for player board, some other different components and boards, action spaces, money, and then another player board. So you can see it takes up a fair amount of a table space. Now as far as setup goes, there's a few ways that you can set it up. What you're seeing here is like the fixed setup. And so you can see these particular tiles here, these are for a 2-player game. This is space 26 and this is space 26 down here on the board. Now there is also these 2 decks of cards here, and these are used in a variety of different ways, giving you some variable ways to kind of do setup. And so what you will do with these decks of cards is randomize the placement of these tiles and these pieces here. These little pieces here are special pieces for laying track, which I'll show you in a little bit. So it's going to randomize those a little bit there. You'll also have some randomization with the tokens there at the top of the board, as well as these influence markers here, which show the different influence of some of the cities that you're going to be making deliveries to. And there's a few other bits of randomization, which we'll talk about when we get through the game. Now players will always start here with one train station up here in the northeast corner of the board in wine, and you'll be building tracks and stations and factories all down throughout the board here. And effectively what players are trying to do is make a connection down here to Trieste. Now you don't have to actually connect to this, but the game will either end after 8 rounds or in the round that somebody actually does make a connection to Trieste, and they'll get some bonuses and things like that for doing so. And depending on if the game actually ended with a connection or if it ended after the 8th round without a connection, will dictate some of how the end game scoring actually is going to occur. Now the way that you win the game is by having the most money, and you'll be building tracks and buildings and train stations and factories and all this kind of stuff on the board to generate money, generate different goods that you can ship and deliver and fulfill different contracts and things like that, and that will generate money. So just a real quick look here at the sort of player setup here. Each player is going to have a board. You've got a few different things going on here. You can see you've got the trains up here with little cars that will carry different goods. So the locomotives can always carry coal, and then any of these other spots here can carry whatever you want. And then you can also upgrade these sort of to passenger cars, which will generate you more income. You can see that one will generate $10 worth of income every round. And you have space here for 3 trains. You can upgrade these to control and have more cars. You've got workers down here, and you can get new workers. You can spend workers in a few ways, and when you build track, you can kind of exert them and push them up into this space. But if you don't do anything with them, then they will sort of train and build up their sort of power over the course of several rounds, and then they'll be able to be more effective. You can also spend workers from any of the spots that are on the board and put them onto the main board to sort of like power your factories. Here you've got spots for your train stations. When you build those, you'll uncover more storage spots and more income. And then if you ever get any factories, you'll put them down here. So for example, if I build this black factory, you'll put that down there. And then these will be used for filling contracts or building certain kinds of factories down there. And then over here, we've kind of got a little personal sort of stock table here, which I'll get to in a minute. But this is pretty much what's going on the board. You've got a little cheat sheet here, player aid, for some of the free actions you can do on your turn. There's 3 kind of free actions you can do, and then there's an end game scoring summary, which we'll talk about. And then here's the money. The money is very nice. It's these nice plastic cards here, so instead of very thin paper money, they've used that. And then off to the side here, you can see you've got tracks and workers in your color that you can put out there. Now there are also these hands, and you'll start with 2 of them, and you'll get up to 5 of them. You'll get new ones each round for the first couple of rounds, and these are going to be how you take the actions that are going to sort of drive the game. Now if we look here at the top of the player board, back up just a little bit, this is kind of like some beginning of round sort of cleanup and setup, and then you're going to go into what's called the action phase here and then check for the end of the round. Now you're not going to do any of this stuff in the first round, so we'll skip that. So we'll go right to the action phase. Then again, if anybody has made a connection to Trieste, that'll trigger the end of the round. Now off to the side of the board here, we have 11 different action spaces, and these are just different little cardboard pieces that you can arrange on the table how you like. So let's just walk through all of those different actions, and then we'll talk a little bit about how the endgame scoring works. Now we'll start with the first one here, which is about how to build track. And it's worth noting before we get started, you can always put your little hands on there to do the action. There's no blocking, so as many players as they want can go here. If you for some reason put a hand on this particular spot, and you already have one, then that's actually going to reduce your influence by 1. We'll talk about influence in a minute though. So if we take this action here and we can build track. Now building track is pretty straightforward. You can see you need one of each of these types of goods here. You've got wood, stone, and iron. And then, so if you build that, you can build up to 2 track. So you can build 1 or 2 track. Now there's some special track. You see this has a white line under it. There's some that has a gray line or an orange line. If you have to build on this kind of track, you'll need a specific kind of worker and an extra good. So if I built 2 track and one of them was kind of the normal track and one was required the gray, I would need the gray engineer as well as spend an extra gray cube. If I built 2 tracks that had the gray, I need 2 extra gray cubes there. Now, as you can see, everybody starts with 1 of each cube. So this black cubes, those are coal. Those are kind of special. I'll talk about that in a minute. But for building track, you just need 1 of each of these. And again, you can build up to 1 or 2. Now, in addition to spending that grouping of resources, you also will need to exert your workers that are down here. And you can see in this first spot here, if I exerted these 2 guys to be like 2 points of strength or 2 points of work, because they're each going to be 1 point. Now, if we let them upgrade here, and we train them, and they're only going to train if you didn't actually exert them in the previous round. You're going to do that, and then so each of these will actually give you 2 points, so that would be worth a total of 4. And then as if we move up here, you can see they're going to be worth 3. So if we exerted both of those, that would be a total of 6. Now the reason that you do that, you exert them like this, is let's say we were building out to here, so you can see there's the cost there in the amount of kind of like worker points that you have to spend. So in this case, you need 3. But if I wanted to do 2 tracks, let's say 1 there and 1 there, that would be a total of 6. So the resource cost is the same no matter what, but you need to kind of like level up your workers and add and get more workers to build out to some of these different areas. Now here you can see kind of in the middle of the board, this one will cost 5 to connect to, this one will cost 6 to connect to there. And then you can also see here some of the different colored tracks there. So you've got here the 2 gray tracks, and then this one up here's got the little bit of orange strip there. So in that case, you need to spend that extra gray or orange resource respectively. So we'll talk more about how to get the different engineers and things in just a little bit here. But that's building track. Now the next action here is effectively constructing a building. So you can either build a train station or a factory. So let's take a look at this spot here. So if we were to build a train station there, the cost is going to be $30, and then you'll mark that, and only 1 person can have a train station in a particular location. Now, the reason you build a train station, in addition to uncovering the storage and whatnot, and upgrading your income, is you cannot have more than 2 connections to a city unless you have a train station. So if we came in here this way and this way, we could not build a track coming out of the bottom like that. So there's some spots that have multiple connections going in them. If you want to spread out a little bit further, or kind of like fork your track from a particular spot, then you're going to need to have a train station in there. Now the second option for this is to actually build a factory. And here is the factory board for 2 players. There's different boards for 3 and 4 players. You can build any of these types of factory. You can see the cost here in the top part of this row. And then as you build them, the cost is going to go up. So initially this was a $10 factory. Now the next time it will be a $20 factory. On the bottom part, you can see kind of the income you will get for delivering that color good. So for this gray one, it's going to go up to 20, but that one will give you $80 back. And then these black ones are a little bit different. They have a key icon for their income, which we'll talk about when we talk about delivering. So you're going to pay the leftmost cost, take that, and then put that on a town. So to do that, you have to go to a spot with one of these sort of icons. There's these boxes. You can see it looks like one of your workers. Because what you're going to do is you're actually going to take this here and, like I said, put it on your player board, and then grab and put one of your workers on that spot. And then that's going to generate a certain number of cubes that are going to kind of go alongside that factory, and that factory is effectively generated that many cubes, and that's all it's going to generate for the game. And that's going to be based on the strength of the worker that you put out there. Now it's worth noting that at the top of the board here, there are already available factory slots. that anybody can get to because they're already connected. They've already got a train station up there, and there's a more or less available based on the player count, but that's going to be an initial spot where a lot of folks are going to put factories out initially, but then they're going to be kind of hunting for other spots here, because you can see not all of these spots have factories available to them. Now, like I said, when you put the factory on here, you're just going to put it down there, and you're going to take one of your workers from somewhere on your board. And they can be somebody that you've used earlier in the turn and exerted for their power to build track, or they could be somebody that you've kept down here. Now, as you let them sort of train up, they're going to put out more or less cubes on the board when they go and get placed out for the factory. So you can see as we start out here, if we grabbed somebody from this column here, they would put 2 cubes of that color of the factory that we built there alongside them out onto the main board. But if you let them level up, they're going to generate more cubes for you there. So if we put out this guy, he would have 4 black cubes out on the board here instead of the 2. So that's how you build a factory there. Now let's jump back and let's talk about how to acquire and hire new workers. And this is a little bit involved. It has to do with the influence of some of the special towns that are out here. Now you can see there's most of the towns here are kind of like this brownish gray here. This one, we've got a blue town there. And then if we go over to this side of the board there, we're going to see this white town, and there's a green town up here, and so on. If we go back down to the influence track, you can see these were seeded at the start of the game. And so the influence level of each of these is going to dictate a lot of I'm going to talk about right now. So to start the game, and I purposely skipped over this before, what you're going to do is there's going to be one sort of blind bidding. Everybody's going to blindly take some money in their hand, and they're going to simultaneously reveal it. And this is the only bidding auction part of the entire game, just the opening of the game. And then depending on how much you bid, you can see 10, 20, 40, 50, 60, you're going to move your marker up. And so the rules tell you to probably always bid enough to get so you can meet or pass 2 of the city influence markers. And I've played around with that, and I think that's probably pretty accurate. But I could see people bidding enough to do 3, or sometimes even bidding enough to do 1. Now, what this is going to do is this is going to allow you to interact with these different cities in different ways. And if your marker is not yet, meeting their marker, then you won't be able to make deliveries there or buy workers out of those different cities. The other thing this is going to do is determine the turn order. Okay, so as you sort of bid up here, the people that are higher up here will be higher up in turn order. And if there's a tie, there's kind of a randomizer at the beginning of the game. But then whoever kind of first goes up to the slot will get that. And then if there's a tie, the next player will go second in turn order. But this influence track here is kind of dictate what you're sort of allowed to do and how you're allowed to interact with the different cities. So before we talk about how to buy workers from the cities, let's show you one other thing about connecting the tracks. So there's a couple of icons here on the board. The first time that you connect to a city like this, you'll get kind of a little benefit. So here, you'll just immediately get +1 influence. So you just move your little influence marker 1 space up on the track. Here, there's a stack of these, and these are kind of determined by the tile. You'll get a certain number of business actions. So the first person to connect there will get 3 kind of free business actions. Next person will get 2, and then finally 1, and so on. And then what happens there is that one of the things you can spend these free business actions on is actually moving up this influence track. Now you can also raise your stock price and then update your cars to be passenger cars, which we'll get to that in a minute. So these are some of the ways that you can get your influence up through building track. Now let's take a look at the worker board. So here you can see the worker board, and you can see how they're sort of associated with the different colored cities. So again, you need to have equal to or greater influence with that city to buy it. But when I go here and buy these workers, you're buying either your own workers. So based on the player color there, you can buy your own workers, and you'll just put them on your player board. And when you buy new workers, you just always will put them down here at sort of level 1 down there. And when you buy the workers, you'll pick one city and buy all your workers from that city. So let's say we pick the blue city. So the first worker cost me 10, the second one will cost me 20. So 10, 20, so that was pay a total of 30. And then from now on, the price of the worker has gone up now to 30 for the next worker. So you kind of want to see, as you get to some of the higher influence cities there, those workers are going to be cheaper for you to buy. So that's why you might bid up a little bit earlier or try to build your influence up so you can get access to some of the cheap workers that nobody has touched yet. Now the other thing you can do is you can buy one of these engineers here. And you can do those from a separate column. So your workers will always have to come from the same column, but the engineers, you can pick a different city that you have influence with, and you can buy that. So if you buy those are always 30. You can see they're always 30. And you only ever need one of each type. So there's always enough for each player to get one of each type, and you just put that there, and that means now you have access to build on those extra types of tracks. So again, if we go out here, the gray and orange tracks, now you need that type of engineer, and then you also need to of course spend the extra matching good type there along with your 3 goods to build your 1 or 2 track there. So that's buying workers there, and that's kind of what they give access to. This next action here is produce, and so you're going to look at all the spots on the board where you have a factory. So we have our example here before, so you can look at all the spots and you can choose and take one of those goods from each of those spots if you want, and then you can put them over here onto your player board where you may or may not have storage. If you don't have storage, then you have to discard them, so there's no reason to take them. But you need empty storage right away to take those. So that is the produce action, and that is the way to get free goods, but there's a way to effectively pay for goods. And if you take this action here, you can either purchase one good immediately or order a certain amount of goods based on the round for the next turn. So let's look at the first options. Let's buy one good. And again, you have to have a place to put it. You have to have storage. So you can buy goods out of this market here, and you can see as you buy the different goods, the cost is going to go up. So if lots of people are buying the brown goods there, you can see the cost is going to start to go up here and get higher and higher. So you can buy one good total of all of those and keep that. Or you can buy several, and then what you do is you will put those goods that you bought, let's say we bought a couple of these here, on this space, and then these will then move over at the beginning of the round into a spot where hopefully you have storage, or else you have to discard some goods to make room. Then they'll come over at the start of the next round and you'll be able to put them. Now the number of goods that you can store in this sort of future spot will change round to round. So you can see this round marker is going to start going up here, and this number here, wherever it's at in the current round, that's going to tell you how many goods total you can store going into the next round. So the first round is only 2. Once it goes up to the next round, of course players will get new workers or new hands to use, but then you can see you can store 3 and then 4. And then these are kind of randomly dealt out, but there are some, like, you can use the fixed one or totally do them randomly. You can see it actually starts to go back down again a little bit that as the rounds go up. Now the next action here is how to build or upgrade the existing trains on your board. So at the start of the game, you've got access to these $40 and $50 trains, and then as the round marker moves up there, you get the 60 and 70, and then finally as the game goes on a little bit further, you have the $80 trains. So what you can do here, let's say we have access to this one, we're in round 4 later, and we're going to buy the $60 train. So when you buy this, you have 2 options. You can either just buy it outright, and you can see some of these will give you a bonus influence when you buy them, and they will give you a free coal if you buy a brand new train. So if you buy a brand new one, you put it here, and then you will take up to 6, in this case, of these cars. And so the way that you know how many cars comes with it, just chop the 0 off. So a 60 will give you 6. You can see the 30 started with 3. If you buy 70, you get 7, and so on. So we'll put these out here like this, and we'll put 6 of them out there. Now what you can also do is upgrade an existing train. Now when you upgrade a train, you don't get a free coal with the train, but you only have to pay the difference here. So if I upgraded a 30 to a 60, I don't have to pay the 30 bucks. And effectively what I'm doing is I'm getting 3 more cars to store there. And don't be afraid to upgrade, because sometimes you can have overkill with the amount of cars that you get there. So anyway, that's kind of your option. You either upgrade an existing train or buy a brand new one. And I talked before about those business points. So one of the actions you can do is raise influence or your stock. And one of the things you can do when you get a business point is actually flip these over. And so these no longer become capable of storing a good, but they're going to give you extra income at the start of the round. You always have an income here of 10 bucks at the start of all subsequent rounds after the first, but for each car that you flip over, then you're going to get an extra 10 bucks there. And then of course down here, I didn't actually show it to you, but I said when you build the stations there, you get an extra 10 bucks income as well at the start of rounds. So that's building and upgrading trains. Now the next action here is actually taking a contract, and there's some sort of side effects of that, and we'll start to get into some of the free actions and things that you can do now. So this one is you can take a contract, and then you're going to get some kind of effects on that, and it's all displayed on the contract cards. So depending on the number of players, you're going to deal out a certain number of these contract cards, and you're always going to have an even number of sort of like level 1. You can see each of those shows 1 factory, these show 2 factories, and these show 3 factories. So always going to have a certain number of those out. And then when you take this action to get a contract card, you just simply grab one of them. So let's grab a level 2 one here. So we're going to grab this one here, and we'll just put this down here next to our player board. And you can see by the end of the game, we want to have a gray factory and an orange factory. Okay, great. Now we have to take 2 of these markers here, like so, and then 2 of these investor tokens, and then we're going to put them on our player boards. Now it's worth noting before we go too much further, these may not actually score you any points. If nobody connects to Trieste, the final town, contracts are worthless. They're not going to ding you for points. They're not going to increase your points or your money. If somebody connects to Trieste and you have not fulfilled this, you have not built a gray and an orange factory, then this will actually cost you $180. If anybody has connected to Trieste, then, and you have these 2 factories, this will actually net you $180. However, if you have not connected to Trieste yourself, you end up having to pay that player $20 per leg of the track to kind of use their connection, kind of branching off from how far down you are. You're gonna have to pay them a little bit too. So it's kind of something to keep in mind there. Now, what are we gonna do with these tokens? So these tokens here actually have to sort of zero out some of our cars here. So let's say we didn't flip that one over. And so you have to take these markers here on that, and then these now sort of get eaten up, and they are sort of dedicated towards that contract in a way. So now you can no longer store any goods in there. So that's going to eat up some of your cars. So that's another reason to upgrade your train. Now you also are going to have here your investors. So you start the game with your stock down here at the $40 level, and you have 1 investor. And anytime you get new investors from grabbing contracts, you just put them in a little stack like this. And then at any time, as one of your 3 actions that you can do, you can take in any investors that are equal to or higher than your current stock price. So let's say it was up here, we'd moved it up, which I'll talk about how to do that in a minute. You could take this guy here and this guy here because they're above or equal to that price, and they will go up to here, and you will get this value wherever your stock price is at. So in this case, you would get 60, 120 for that. And so this guy's now below it, so he can't actually do it. Now you can also, if you want, actually lower your stock price to theoretically get more people involved in investing, but again, you don't get as much. Now it is worth noting, if you move these guys up here, you can see there's sort of an in-game penalty for doing so. You actually, for each investor up here, you take your final total money and then subtract 10% from your final score, and then that's going to reduce your final score. But this is one of the free actions that you can do. So the way that you can manipulate the stock prices by taking this action, you can either move up your stock price by 1 step, or you can drop it by as many steps as you want. But you're going to lose influence when you increase it. So you can see the first time you do this, you're going to drop your influence by 1. The second time you increase your stock price, you're going to drop it by 2. Okay? Now you can always drop it as far as you want when you take this action here for no penalty. But remember, we talked about those business actions before, right? So one thing again is you can increase your influence. You can increase, you can flip over the cars to be a passenger car. And the last thing you can do when you take those business actions is just raise your stock price for free, and you don't take the influence penalty when you do that. So the last 3 actions are very straightforward. For this one, you can spend $10 per influence that you want to increase. So if you spend $30, you go 1, 2, 3, and you could spend it $10 per influence and increase it. This one is just get $10, and this one, of course, is just pass. Because remember, even if you wanted to go back to the $10 and just get $10 and you kind of screwed yourself out of a bunch of actions, you maybe don't want to lose the influence here because that's going to affect some certain things. So you might actually end up sometimes having to go to the pass place. So let's now talk about a couple of these other free actions. Now we talked about how to get investor money. There's 2 other free actions here. This one here is how you actually deliver goods. So you can deliver goods once per your turn, so as a free action, and then you can also build on these special tracks here. So let's talk about delivery. So if I want to deliver a good, it's got to come from one of my factories that I built. So here's the one we built earlier in the example. And again, I've got to be connected by my track to one of these special cities. Again, that's marked with the influence on the track below, and I have to have influence equal to or greater than that. So in this case, you can see, let's take a closer look at this. All of these special cities are the same. They want 1 of each of those colored cubes and then 2 coal. So at most they can be delivered those 5 cubes. And again, you have to have the influence here equal to or greater that particular color of a city there. And so when you make a delivery, you're going to get a payout. And of course, you have to be connected to the city and all that stuff. And the other thing you have to do before I forget is you have to spend a coal from your player board. So if we look up here, you're making the delivery for the cube that's out here on the board, but you have to spend a coal to sort of, make that shipment to get it down your tracks and get there. So you've always got to spend that. Now, depending on the color of cube, you might get a different payout. So you can see as you build factories, so let's just grab a couple of these off of there, you're going to get a certain payout based on the lower number here. So if you delivered a brown cube at this time, you would get $60 money. If you delivered a gray cube, you get 70. Nobody's built any orange yet, but if somebody built the first one, they're going to get 100. Now you can see the amount you get down kind of goes down because there's, more shippers in the supply, so the demand goes down a little bit. Now the black ones are a little bit special because you can see you get this key. Well, you're going to get a key matching the color of the city that you shipped to. And so you can see there's 2 keys, because remember, each of these cities wants the 2 black cubes. So the first player to ship to the blue city will get the big key, and the second player will get the little key. Now you can never have both keys. And so the keys are worth a certain amount of money at the end of the game, and that money is going to be equal to wherever this particular influence on that city is at. So the big key is always worth the number that's right underneath it, and then the little key is worth the nearest little number that's to the left of it. So in this case, the big key would be 70 for blue, and the little one would be 30. Up here, the big key would be worth 100, and then the little key would be worth 50. Now, every time you ship to a city, no matter what color cube it is, it's going to move up. So as you ship to it, it actually gets more difficult to ship to it. So if you ship to it, you might, screw another player out of being able to ship to it on their turn because you've now passed them on the influence track. Now, the amount that the influence goes up, though, is varied based on these tokens here. So the first shipment, in this case, let's see if we can zoom in a little bit there. So the first shipment to that city, the influence goes up 1, next one goes up 2, next one goes up 2, then 1, then 1. And so these are seeded out here, either randomly or fixed based on the setup that you do, about how much the influence is going to go up based on the different shipments you send to that city. Finally, the last kind of free special action that you can do is actually build on these spots. And these are sort of randomly dealt out or fixed dealt out based on the setup. Now, you can't build track on these spots in the normal way. These you actually have to just pay money. And all you have to do is just pay money. You don't have to spend workers or goods or anything. The first player to make this connection looks at the 2 cities, and then the higher dollar amount they have to pay. So in this case, if I was trying to be the first one to make that connection, I would have to pay $40. The next players after that want to go in here, they will pay the lower amount, but they will pay that to the first player. So whoever got in there first, they paid the $40, but if we're playing a 3-player game, the next 2 players, theoretically, that come in here, they will pay $20 a piece to get to that player. The last special spot on the board before we talk about endgame scoring, because it has to do with endgame scoring, is this spot here. So the first player to make that connection will take this bridge piece, and that will help them during endgame scoring. So let's talk about endgame scoring. So the first thing you're going to do, everybody's going to get income based on the number of passenger cars and stations, everything they built. Whoever built that connection that has that bridge piece, they will get to do that twice. So they'll add that income to their money supply for the end of the game scoring. Then you're actually going to score the keys here. So the keys will get the money that I showed you earlier. If you have influence equal to or greater than a certain number of cities, so if you have equal to or greater than influence of all 4 cities, you get an additional $100. If you only got 3 cities, you get 60, and so on. Then you're going to score your contracts, maybe, if somebody connected to Trieste, or you're going to lose money if you have an unfulfilled contract if somebody connected to Trieste. And again, you have to pay that player, if you're not connected to Trieste yourself, $20 per link that you have to do, which could be quite a bit of money. And it's worth noting here, since we're talking about Trieste, that when you connect to this, you get immediately $10 income for every track you have on the board, which is a pretty good, nice little payout as well. And then finally, after calculating all of that, for each of your investors, like I showed you, you're going to lose 10% of your final income. So you total up all your income down to here, whatever that final amount is, you lose, 10, 20, 30%. And that is how you play. Okay, so that's Imperial Steam. Let's jump into my 3 pillars of review. First, I'll talk about the player count. I've only played a 2- and 3-player game. And I have a feeling, unfortunately, I think 4-player would probably be my favorite way to play. But I will say this, I really did enjoy it as a 2-player game. It works really, really well. I thought it scaled really well. It was very interesting. I think, though, you still miss out on a little bit of the interesting stuff because you got, with 3 players, you had multiple people kind of going to different cities, and you kind of concerned about that kind of thing. And you sort of that dynamics of the supply and demand of the certain factories, and there's just a lot more in play that makes the game more interesting. But really, if you said I wanted to buy this and I wanted to only play a 2-player, I would actually recommend it in this case. I know a lot of times I'll say it, and a lot of people will say it where it's still, it works pretty good at 2, but it's way better with 3 or 4. I would still say it's better, obviously, but I would still recommend it highly, and I would play a 2-player any day of the week. Now, in terms of the play time, the box is 90 minutes to 2 hours. And that's been my experience. I would say the first time we played it with 3 people, it probably went a little bit over 2 hours, but now we could get it done for sure in less than 2 hours. And then I think I don't remember the 2-player game that we played, but it had to have been under 2 hours. But I would say once you kind of get the hang of it, because it is a little bit like funky mechanically, in terms of like also figuring out like, what should I be doing, what's a smart move and that kind of stuff. It will probably push over the 2-hour mark, especially at 4 players. But I think theoretically, once everybody at the table has played it, even a 4-player game should come in right around that 2-hour mark, maybe a little bit higher. Everybody's prone to analysis paralysis in different ways, but if I cloned myself and 4 of us played it, I don't know, we don't do that, but I think we can get it done in 2 hours. That makes no sense. But anyway, so there's kind of the player count stuff. Now, what would I compare this to? I sort of alluded to it at the beginning, well, directly. It reminds me a lot of Barrage. I almost said brass and barrage at the same time. Barrage and brass. I can't even say the word again. Barrage. Okay, there we go. That's barrage and brass. That's this game. This game is barrage. I'm gonna leave this in. So yeah, it plays nothing like those. So if you watch the walkthrough or you're familiar with the mechanics are not like those games, but the sort of like coexistence of the players with all the different kinds of resources that are in play, the different routes that are in play, the supply and demand parts of the game, all of that kind of stuff really reminds me of those games. So they're kind of like a train game because you've got routes and things like that, but it's not really, it's so divorced for me from like an 18xx game or a Steam game, all 3 of these games, Brass, Barrage, and Imperial Steam, that it's kind of like it's in its own sort of pure, not pure economics, that's silly, but it's like, it's a pure Euro economics where you've got routes, so you could say it's a train game because it has routes, but there's just so much other stuff going on that drives the game beyond just like stock manipulation. I think it lives in that kind of space with that. Now, I will say to kind of like the real crux for me of this game, and this is one of my favorite games of the year easily, is the whole contract thing. So when you go and you grab a contract, that is such a very interesting thing because that contract, by doing that may not be worth anything at the end of the game if nobody connects to Trieste. And I've seen games where people connect to Trieste, and I've seen games where they don't. I've not seen a game where everybody connects to Trieste, although I'm sure it's possible. But sometimes by taking a big contract card, you can scare people away from connecting to Trieste because it's like, okay, I built some factories, I've got all the factories on this card, so if you connect to it, I'm going to get $350 or whatever. And yeah, I'll have to pay you $60, because you're connected and I'm not, but I'm getting $350. And so, okay, fine, go ahead and connect to Trieste. And so that's a real interesting dynamic. And I think what reminds me of Brass and Barrage in this case is that there's that technology sort of coexistence that happens. So it's like you're focused on this aspect of the economy of making the connection. Maybe you've got a lot of passenger cars, so you've kind of developed your train line to be more of a tourist kind of thing, and you've got some factories and some train stations on the side to sort of diversify your options in your business. But now I'm kind of setting up these big contracts and things like that. So I'm sort of relying on you to connect to Trieste in that case. And maybe I've grabbed a few contracts. I've built a lot of factories. And so the way that the economy of the game feels very, very organic in this case, because you have lots of types of factories. You've got lots of types of benefits for the different factories. You know, getting those black factories out here where you deliver the coal, you can ship out and have like a huge kind of end game payout of just the keys. So even that person that connects to Trieste, you might have to pay them a little bit, but if you've got all those keys and the contracts and that end game income, then that's not really, not really necessary to do. So because you have that sort of player-driven sort of economy, it just really makes the game, that much more vibrant and lively. Now this one it's kind of funky mechanically, because there's a couple things you have to watch out for. This is what I want to kind of go into next so you have the spots where you want to put those factories. And those are few and far between. There's some stuff here at the beginning of the game at the top of the board where everybody can kind of rush to get factories out. But then as you kind of move your tracks through the different areas, there's going to be times in the game when there's not really a good spot to put factories out. And having those factories and being able to produce out of those factories and effectively get free goods to build your track instead of going to the market and buying them is huge. And being able to make the deliveries is huge. So you've got to really watch those factory spaces and be careful about that kind of thing. Now, the sort of counterbalance to that is the whole worker economy, because you're going to get workers, you're going to use them to sort of exert their strength and their influence or whatever to get the tracks out. But then as they start to level up, you're going to actually have to spend them and put them out on the board. So that's going to sort of slow down your rail building part of your industry. So you have to be very, very discreet and time it right with how you use your workers. And so these are kind of like your employees here, where you have to really put them in the right positions at the right time. Because if you let them train up, you get more cubes when you put them out. So yeah, you're losing a big, strong worker that would help you build tracks to some of the more difficult parts. But down that factory is going to have 4 cubes coming out, and so that's cubes you can collect, cubes that you can deliver to cities, and so on. So all of these things kind of coalesce together because you need tracks to connect to the cities that you're going to deliver to, but you want to have cubes on the other hand to actually send to those cities once you are connected to them. So you don't want to use all your cubes and just laying track, although you could be very, very track driven and not so delivery driven. And there's times in the game where you're going to want to tick and tack your strategy to be more track driven or more delivery driven and so on. And so kind of the dynamics of the board coming out like that are pretty interesting. And there's some other good sort of places to kind of chew on. So, once you start to get some trains built up, you have those cars, do you want to flip those over to get income? So the income can be very handy to get at the start of the game, start of the round. The whole investor thing where you have to spend investors, but then you get that 10% ding at the end of the game. You think that's a very interesting thing, because I've played around with that a little bit, and where we did it and I was like, I should have never did that, that really hurt me in a case. But then I did it a whole bunch one game and it really worked, because I was like, whatever, I'm going to get this big old contract payout. So if I have to pay, minus $100 at the end of the game, then that's not a big deal, because I've generated enough money, and that money that I got out of those investors was just huge for me. And so I was able to get out a bunch of factories and stuff like that. So I would say it seems kind of scary, but I would say abuse those investors, because having that cash injection, especially if you move the stock price up, that can be massive, because the game is very tight money-wise, it's tight worker-wise, it's tight with the resources. So that investor thing is just such a neat sort of, it's almost like it's a trap sometimes, but there's sometimes where you're like, no, we're going to invest, I'm going to get this huge cash injection, and it's going to really work out. Again, it's just kind of one of those other layers of everything kind of coming together, the dynamics of all the economic stuff. So the other thing I would just kind of leave you with is the variability of the board is really neat, because if you had the same fixed board layout, that would be super boring. But now there's all these different ways you can set the board up and mix the towns around, and so the dynamics of where those factory locations are at and where the shipping locations are at, and where all the business actions and the influence bumps and stuff like that are at, and how they kind of relate to some of those special routes with the different engineers and stuff that you have to use is really cool. And that's neat, because You could probably get away with only one type of engineer, like either the orange or the gray one. And then you just kind of have to maybe build around some of the other spots where you don't have the extra engineer. Because a lot of times, man, when you get the track and you're like, I just need that one extra cube to do that. And I have this engineer who I have, but it's useless because all I needed was a cube now, and I don't have the cube because my economy is just, so tightened up. So you can probably, you can play around with this, but you can just go after one engineer. And then the other spots where you might work yourself into sort of a corner, there is places to get around. So you're going to need one of them. But if you have both, you're easy peasy as long as you have the cubes. But then if you have one, you can kind of go and work your track around other different ways and stuff like that. So anyway, it's just a good dynamic game. Lots of ebb and flow. It feels very organic and all that stuff. There's a lot of emergent kind of qualities for the game. And it's really straightforward. Like, it's very funky and different the way that everything works, because there's just like kind of a lot of different sort of I would say they're very unique to this game, the way the different moving pieces work. But it's a really excellent game, and I think it really, like I said, I haven't played it 4-player, but I expect that would be my favorite just because there'll be just like a lot of stuff going on. Maybe it'd be too much going on, and 3 is the perfect count, but 2-player works really, really well. It's very dynamic. So anyway, I definitely recommend Imperial Steam. If any kind of Euro lover, economic, type of player, really will get a huge kick out of this one. Thanks.